I'm Brianna Hayes, 32, and despite running a major tech division, I've always kept quiet about my success, especially around my brother James. That Easter Sunday at our parents' suburban home, I knew something had to give. For years, James had dismissed my career while inflating his own importance. Little did he know, my company had just acquired his failing startup. My stomach knotted as we gathered around the table. Before I tell you what happened when my success finally spoke louder than my brother's ego, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, and subscribe if you've ever dealt with a know-it-all family member. Growing up in Portland with James was like living in perpetual shadow. From the moment he built his first computer at 12, while I was still playing with friendship bracelets, a pattern was established. James was the tech genius. I was just the little sister trying to keep up. "That's nice, Brie," he'd say whenever I showed him something I was proud of, that dismissive tone making it clear he thought whatever I'd accomplished was child's play compared to his achievements. When I won the school science fair in 6th grade, James was quick to point out that my project on solar energy was pretty basic compared to the programming competition he'd won that same year. Our parents, Richard and Kathleen, didn't intentionally play favorites, but they were in awe of James's technical abilities. Dad, an accountant who still struggled to program the DVR, looked at James like he was speaking another language when he talked about coding. Mom, a high school English teacher, would just smile and nod, clearly impressed even when she didn't understand what he was saying. "Your brother has a special gift," they'd tell me. Not everyone thinks that way. The pattern continued through high school. I excelled in business classes and leadership positions, but those achievements always seemed secondary to James's programming skills and robotics trophies. When college applications rolled around, James was accepted to MIT with a partial scholarship for computer science. I chose a business program at the University of Washington, and though it was a great school with an excellent reputation, James couldn't help but snicker. "Business, huh? I guess not everyone can handle the rigor of a real STEM program." My parents reprimanded him, but with no real conviction. "James, be nice to your sister," Dad would say, but then immediately ask James about his latest coding project, effectively validating the hierarchy James had established. The only person who ever really saw me was my grandmother Eleanor. Grandma was a surprise in our family. At 78, she had an iPad, a smartphone, and was more tech-savvy than my parents. She'd been a mathematics professor in the 1970s when women in her field were rare, and she recognized something in me that others missed. "They don't see it yet," she told me once during my sophomore year of college when I was home for Christmas break, feeling particularly overshadowed after James had spent dinner talking about his internship at Google. "But you have something just as valuable as technical knowledge, Brianna. You understand people and systems. You see the big picture. That matters in technology too." With her encouragement, I focused on my strengths. I graduated with honors, landing a job in marketing at a small tech firm called DG Path. James, predictably, was unimpressed. "Marketing for a tech company," he said at my graduation dinner. "So you'll be making pretty brochures for products you don't understand?" I swallowed my anger and promised myself I'd prove him wrong. I worked twice as hard as anyone else at DG Path, not just learning the marketing side, but understanding our products deeply enough to explain their value to clients. I took night classes in basic programming, not to become a developer, but to speak the language of our technical teams. Within 3 years, I'd moved up to marketing director, and 2 years after that, I was recruited by Synergy Tech, a major player in enterprise software. Each step forward in my career was met with the same dismissive attitude from James. When I excitedly told my family about my new job at Synergy Tech, James interrupted with news about his own startup idea. My promotion to team lead coincided with his first round of seed funding. When I was made department head, he announced he'd been featured in a tech blog. Family gatherings became increasingly tense as James dominated conversations with technical jargon, positioning himself as the only person at the table who truly understood the modern world. He'd use terms like neural networks and blockchain architecture without explanation, effectively shutting down any meaningful contribution from others. "Don't worry if you don't get it," he'd say, especially to me. "It's pretty complex stuff." My parents would beam with pride, while I sat quietly, building my career without fanfare. Grandma Eleanor would catch my eye across the table and give me a knowing wink. "Patience," her look seemed to say. "Your time will come." And it did, in a way I never could have anticipated. 7 years into my career at Synergy Tech, I was appointed Director of Strategic Acquisitions, responsible for identifying promising smaller companies for potential purchase. It was during a routine review of acquisition targets that a familiar name appeared on my desk. Nextier, a startup with promising technology but struggling financials. James's startup. My career trajectory at Synergy Tech hadn't been accidental. While James was busy talking about his achievements, I was quietly building mine. I started in marketing but quickly demonstrated an aptitude for understanding market trends and identifying opportunities. My ability to translate between technical teams and business objectives made me valuable, and my talent for strategic thinking moved me up the corporate ladder faster than even I had expected. After 8 years, I found myself as Director of Strategic Acquisitions, a position that combined my business acumen with my hard-earned technical knowledge. My team was responsible for identifying promising companies that could either complement Synergy Tech's offerings or eliminate future competition. We analyzed dozens of potential acquisitions each quarter, looking not just at current value, but at future potential. It was during one of our regular scouting sessions that the name Nextier appeared on our radar. They had developed an innovative approach to machine learning that could potentially enhance our flagship product. The company had strong intellectual property and talented engineers, but was struggling with monetization and market penetration, a common problem for technically brilliant founders without business experience. "This one has potential," my assistant Parker noted, sliding the preliminary report across my desk. "Small team, great tech, burning through cash too quickly. Classic acquisition target." I opened the file and froze when I saw the founder's name, James Hayes. My brother's company was on our acquisition list, and he had no idea I was in a position to influence its fate. My first instinct was to recuse myself immediately. There was a clear conflict of interest, and I prided myself on my professional ethics. But before I could pass the file to my colleague, curiosity got the better of me. What exactly had my brother built? How was his company really performing? For once, I had the opportunity to see beyond James's carefully curated narrative. What I found surprised me. The technology was genuinely innovative. James had always been brilliant, but the business was in trouble. Nextier had burned through 2 rounds of funding with minimal revenue to show for it. Their customer acquisition costs were unsustainable, their marketing strategy was inconsistent, and they had no clear path to profitability. The very aspects of business that James had dismissed as trivial compared to technical development were the areas where his company was failing. I arranged a meeting with our Chief Strategy Officer, Monica Reynolds, to discuss the situation. "I need to disclose a potential conflict," I said as soon as we sat down. "Nextier's founder is my brother." Monica raised an eyebrow. "I didn't realize your brother was in tech." I laughed despite myself. "Oh, he's made sure everyone knows he's in tech. He just doesn't advertise that his sister works for a corporate sellout like Synergy Tech." After discussing the ethical considerations, we decided that I would recuse myself from direct negotiations, but could remain involved in an advisory capacity. The acquisition made sense for Synergy Tech regardless of my personal connection, and my knowledge of both the technology sector and my brother's work could be valuable. "Just keep everything by the book," Monica advised. "Document all communications, and we'll make sure there's no appearance of either favoritism or sabotage." For the next 3 months, I watched from the periphery as our acquisition team conducted due diligence on Nextier. Their findings confirmed my initial assessment. brilliant technology hampered by poor business execution. To my surprise, I found myself advocating for the acquisition despite my complicated feelings about James. The technology was worth saving, and the team, except perhaps its founder, deserved a chance to succeed with proper support. What struck me most during the process was that James appeared completely unaware of my role at Synergy Tech. In the few family gatherings that occurred during this period, he continued to talk down to me about tech while I sat silently, knowing more about his company's financial state than he realized I could possibly understand. The acquisition was finalized 1 week before Easter. Nextier would become a subsidiary of Synergy Tech, with their technology integrated into our main platform. James would stay on as a technical advisor for 1 year, reporting to a manager who, ironically, reported to me. The financial terms were generous, more generous than the company's performance warranted, but we were paying for the intellectual property and talent, not the current revenue. As Easter approached, I found myself increasingly anxious about the inevitable family gathering. Should I tell my family about my involvement before the dinner? Should I warn James? I called Grandma Eleanor for advice. "You've done nothing wrong, Brianna," she said firmly. "You've built a career you should be proud of, and you've conducted yourself ethically throughout this process. If James has misrepresented his success or underestimated yours, that's for him to reconcile." "But it's going to be so awkward," I groaned. "Perhaps," Grandma replied, and I could hear the smile in her voice. "But sometimes a little awkwardness is necessary for growth. Come to dinner, be yourself, and let the truth find its way to the table." So that's what I decided to do. I would attend Easter dinner without preemptively revealing my role in the acquisition. I wouldn't lie if asked directly, but I wouldn't volunteer information either. Let James tell his version first, I thought. After all these years of living in his shadow, I was curious to see how he would present his company's successful exit. Easter Sunday arrived with deceptive tranquility. The April sky was clear blue, blossoms dotted the trees in my parents' yard, and the air carried that distinctive spring freshness. I pulled up to my childhood home with Michael, my boyfriend of 2 years, beside me. Michael squeezed my hand reassuringly. "Remember, you've done nothing wrong," he said, echoing Grandma Eleanor's words. "And I'm here for moral support." Michael knew all about James. He'd witnessed enough family gatherings to understand the dynamic, and he'd been my sounding board throughout the acquisition process. As a high school history teacher, he was refreshingly removed from the tech world, which made him a perfect neutral party. "I know," I sighed. "I just hate confrontation." "Sometimes it finds you anyway," he replied sagely. Mom greeted us at the door with her customary enthusiasm, hugging us both tightly. "Brianna, Michael, so good to see you. Everyone's already here. We're just waiting on Aunt Linda and Uncle Rob." By everyone, she meant James and his wife Heather had already arrived, along with Grandma Eleanor and my father's brother Uncle Dave with his family. I steeled myself and stepped into the living room. James was holding court by the fireplace, gesturing animatedly while Heather smiled politely beside him. Dad and Uncle Dave were nodding, seeming impressed by whatever he was saying. Heather spotted me first and waved, genuine warmth in her expression. Despite everything, I'd always liked Heather. She was kind and unpretentious, a pediatric nurse who seemed to balance James's ego with her own groundedness. "Brianna," she exclaimed, coming over to hug me. "It's been too long." James turned, his storytelling interrupted. "Oh, hey sis. Michael." He nodded curtly at my boyfriend before immediately pivoting back to his audience. Anyway, as I was saying, the exit strategy worked perfectly. You have to know when to cash in your chips in this industry. My stomach tightened. Exit strategy? James was already spinning the acquisition as if it had been his master plan all along, rather than a necessary lifeline for a sinking company. "Tech is so volatile right now," he continued, "but if you know what you're doing, you can position yourself for maximum leverage." Dad beamed proudly. James was just telling us about his company's acquisition. Sounds like he made quite a deal. Is that right? I said, keeping my voice neutral. Congratulations, James. He shrugged with affected modesty. Just how the game is played. Not everyone understands the long-term strategy involved. Brianna works in tech too, Michael interjected helpfully. James laughed. Yeah, marketing for some corporate giant. Not quite the same as founding and exiting a startup. Before I could respond, Mom called from the kitchen. Brianna, could you help me with the deviled eggs? Grateful for the escape, I slipped away to the kitchen where Grandma Eleanor was already arranging appetizers on a platter. She looked up as I entered, her eyes twinkling. Just in time, she said, handing me a serving spoon. Your mother needs help, and I need entertainment. How's our tech mogul spinning his tail out there? Grandma, I whispered, glancing toward the door. He's acting like he orchestrated the whole thing as some brilliant strategy. She chuckled softly. Men like your brother often rewrite history to protect their egos. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I busied myself with the deviled eggs. Nothing, I guess. What can I do? Stand up and announce that his company was failing and my company saved it. You could, she said calmly. Or you could simply tell the truth if asked directly. Not to humiliate him, but because truth matters. Especially in families. You don't think I should just let it go? Keep the peace. Grandma Eleanor placed a warm hand over mine. Peace built on falsehood isn't really peace, Brianna. It's suppression. You've spent your whole life diminishing your light so James could shine brighter. Maybe it's time to stop doing that. Mom bustled in before I could respond, assigning us more food preparation tasks. The next hour passed in a flurry of activity as the remaining guests arrived and the house filled with the chaotic energy of a large family gathering. Through it all, I could hear James's voice rising above others, continuing to shape his narrative of entrepreneurial brilliance. As I helped Grandma set the dining room table, she murmured, "Stand tall, but don't force it. The truth has a way of finding its moment." Finally, Mom announced dinner was ready. We all gathered around the large oak table, passing dishes and filling plates. James strategically positioned himself at the center of the table, directly across from Dad, the perfect spot for commanding attention. Michael and I sat near one end, with Grandma Eleanor beside me. As we settled in for the meal, I felt the tension in my shoulders building. James had spent the past hour misleading our family about his professional situation while dismissing mine. Yet here I sat, silently complicit in his deception. Grandma Eleanor was right, this wasn't peace. And as the dinner conversation inevitably turned toward careers and accomplishments, I knew the moment of truth was rapidly approaching. Easter dinner in the Hayes family had always been a production. Mom's table groaned under the weight of traditional favorites: honey-glazed ham, scalloped potatoes, green bean casserole, and her famous yeast rolls that took hours to prepare. Crystal glasses that only appeared for special occasions caught the light from the dining room chandelier, and the good china, a wedding gift from my grandparents, was arranged in perfect place settings. Aunt Linda raised her glass. "Before we start, I think we should toast. To family, to spring, and to new beginnings." And to success, James added quickly, raising his own glass higher. To new ventures and knowing when to cash out. Everyone dutifully lifted their glasses, though I noticed Heather's smile seemed strained. Grandma Eleanor's eyes met mine briefly before we all took a sip and began passing dishes around the table. The conversation flowed easily at first, centered on safe topics like Cousin Amy's new baby, Uncle Rob's recent retirement, and Aunt Linda's planned trip to Italy. But as the meal progressed, James grew increasingly restless with topics that didn't allow him to showcase his achievements. When there was a brief lull in conversation, he seized the opportunity. "So, Dad, I've been thinking about advising you on your retirement portfolio," he said, cutting into his ham. "After this acquisition, I've got some insights into where tech is headed that could really maximize your returns." Dad looked impressed. "That would be great, son. I could certainly use the help." "What about you, Brianna?" Aunt Linda asked kindly. How's work going for you? Still at the same company. Before I could answer, James jumped in. Bree's still doing marketing at that big corporate place. What is it again? Synergysoft. Synergy Tech, I corrected quietly. Right, James continued dismissively. Anyway, as I was telling Dad, the real action is in startups. Corporate tech is where innovation goes to die. I took a slow, deep breath. Actually, that's not. The problem with corporate environments, James interrupted, warming to his topic, is that they're full of people who couldn't cut it as entrepreneurs. No offense, Bree, he added with a patronizing smile that made it clear offense was absolutely intended. Mom tried to redirect. Brianna has been promoted several times, James. She's doing very well. Sure, James nodded condescendingly. I'm sure she's great at whatever marketing stuff she does. But let's be real, it's not the same as being in the trenches, building something from nothing, taking real risks. The table had grown uncomfortably quiet. Even Michael, normally diplomatic to a fault, was gripping his fork with unnecessary force. I focused on cutting my ham into perfectly even pieces, willing myself to stay calm. James, oblivious to the tension, or perhaps feeding on it, continued his monologue. The tech industry separates the visionaries from the support staff pretty quickly. Some people have what it takes to innovate, to disrupt, to lead technological revolutions. Others are better suited to, well, supporting roles. He looked directly at me. Not everyone can handle a real career in tech. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom looked mortified, Dad uncomfortable. Heather was staring intently at her plate. I felt Michael's hand find mine under the table, squeezing supportively. And then, from the other end of the table, came Grandma Eleanor's clear, steady voice. Is that why your company just bought his? Time seemed to stop. All eyes swiveled from Grandma to me, then to James, whose fork clattered against his plate. His face, usually so composed, cycled rapidly through confusion, disbelief, and then dawning horror. What? He sputtered, looking frantically between Grandma and me. What are you talking about? Grandma Eleanor took a calm sip of her water. I'm simply asking if that's why Brianna's company, Synergy Tech, acquired your startup, Next Tier. Because they're the real tech innovators. The table erupted in confused murmurs. Dad looked bewildered. Brianna's company bought James's? What does that mean? James's face had flushed deep red. That's not what happened, he stammered. We were acquired. Yes, but it was a strategic exit. I chose to sell. And Brianna had nothing to do with it. She works in marketing, for God's sake. All eyes turned to me. For a moment, I considered letting it go, finding some diplomatic way to preserve James's dignity. But then I remembered Grandma's words about truth in families, and all the years I'd spent dimming my light. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than I expected, I'm the Director of Strategic Acquisitions at Synergy Tech. I've been in that role for almost 2 years now. James stared at me in disbelief. That's impossible. You would have said something. Would I? I asked quietly. When would I have mentioned it, James? Between your lectures on blockchain or your explanations of why marketing isn't real tech work. Wait, Dad interjected, looking confused. You're saying you were involved in buying James's company? She's lying, James snapped. She's trying to take credit for my exit. If she worked in acquisitions, I would have known. My team dealt with Synergy Tech executives. Your team dealt with my team, I corrected him. I recused myself from direct negotiations because of our relationship. But yes, I was involved in an advisory capacity, and I'm the one who initially identified Next Tier as an acquisition target. The stunned silence that followed was broken by Heather's soft voice. It's true, James. I saw Brianna's name on some of the preliminary paperwork. I assumed you knew and just weren't mentioning it. James looked betrayed. You knew? And you didn't tell me. I thought you knew. Heather protested. Why wouldn't you know? Because she's lying. James pushed back from the table violently, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is sabotage. You deliberately targeted my company, didn't you? Couldn't stand that I was finally succeeding, so you had to take over and ruin it. Your company was 3 months from bankruptcy, James, I said, keeping my voice level. You had great technology, but no sustainable business model. The acquisition saved your company, your employees' jobs, and your reputation. How dare you? James was nearly shouting now. You know nothing about tech business. James, Mom interjected, please calm down. I will not calm down, he snapped. My sister has been undermining me my entire life, and now she's claiming she saved my company? That's rich. I looked around the table at the shocked faces of my family. I'm not claiming I saved anything. I'm just telling the truth about what I do and what happened. Nextier had valuable IP and talented engineers. That's why we acquired it. It was a business decision, not a personal one. James laughed bitterly. Right. Just business. Is that why you never mentioned your role? Because it was so impersonal. I never mentioned my role because you never asked, I said simply. You've never been interested in my career, James. You've been too busy explaining to everyone why what you do is so much more important. The raw honesty of my statement hung in the air. James opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. Without another word, he turned and stormed out of the dining room. A moment later, the front door slammed. The table remained silent for several long seconds. Finally, Uncle Rob cleared his throat. Well, that was unexpected. Aunt Linda turned to me. Brianna, honey, I had no idea you were so high up in your company. Why haven't you ever told us? I looked around at my family, at the genuine surprise and interest on their faces, and felt a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying begin to lift. I guess no one ever really asked, I said softly. As the shock of James's departure settled over the table, all eyes turned to me. The family dynamic had shifted so suddenly that no one seemed to know quite how to proceed. Heather looked particularly uncomfortable, caught between loyalty to her husband and the uncomfortable truth that had been revealed. Perhaps, Grandma Eleanor suggested gently, this would be a good time for Brianna to tell us about her actual career. Mom nodded eagerly, though her eyes kept darting to the front door where James had exited. Yes, please. I feel terrible that we don't know more about what you do, sweetheart. I took a deep breath, feeling strangely vulnerable. For years, I'd protected myself by keeping my professional life separate from my family, partly because of James's dismissive attitude and partly because I'd grown accustomed to being overlooked. I started at Synergy Tech in marketing, that's true, I began. But I moved into product strategy after 2 years, then to business development, and finally to acquisitions. I've been with the company for 9 years now. 9 years. Dad looked surprised. That's impressive in tech, isn't it? Such a volatile industry. Michael nodded. Extremely impressive. Brianna manages a team of 15 people and reports directly to the C-suite. A small smile tugged at my lips as I glanced at my supportive boyfriend. It's a good position. I enjoy the work. But what exactly do you do? Aunt Linda asked, seeming genuinely interested. So I told them. I explained how my team identified promising companies with valuable technology or market position, how we evaluated their potential fit with Synergy Tech, and how we structured deals that benefited both parties. I described the due diligence process, the negotiation strategies, and the integration challenges that followed acquisitions. That sounds incredibly complex, Uncle Rob commented. I had no idea. And next here, Dad asked cautiously, how did that come about? I explained the process as factually as possible, emphasizing the professional aspects and downplaying any personal elements. The technology was genuinely innovative, I said, wanting to be fair to James despite everything. Our technical team was impressed with what they'd built. But the business fundamentals weren't strong enough to sustain the company independently. So you saved them, Aunt Linda concluded. We made a business decision that benefited both companies, I corrected gently. Synergy Tech got valuable IP and talent. Next year's investors got a better return than they would have otherwise, and their employees got job security. And James? Mom asked quietly. James received fair compensation for his work and has a 1-year contract as a technical advisor, I explained. After that, he can stay on if both parties agree it's working out. Heather, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. The acquisition saved us financially, she admitted. James wouldn't want me to say this, but we were in trouble. He'd put everything into the company, our savings, a second mortgage on our house. We were 3 missed payrolls away from losing everything. Her honesty surprised me. James had always presented their life as one of startup glamour and imminent success. I'd had no idea they were so financially vulnerable. I didn't know it was that serious, I said softly. Heather nodded. James is proud. He wouldn't admit how bad things had gotten. When Synergy Tech's offer came through, it was like a miracle, but he couldn't see it that way. To him, it felt like failure. Dad looked troubled. But why wouldn't he tell us? We could have helped. For the same reason he couldn't admit Brianna might be successful in tech, Grandma Eleanor interjected wisely. Pride. The conversation paused as we all absorbed this. I felt a complex mix of emotions, vindication that my family finally understood my career, sadness for James's struggles, and lingering frustration that it had taken this kind of confrontation for the truth to emerge. I should probably go talk to him, Heather said, moving to stand. No, I said, making a sudden decision. I'll go. Michael squeezed my hand. Are you sure? I nodded. We need to clear the air once and for all. As I pushed back from the table, Mom looked worried. Brianna, maybe give him some time to cool down first? We've given this situation years to cool down, Mom, I replied. I think it's time for some honest conversation. I found James sitting on the front porch steps, staring out at the quiet suburban street. He didn't look up when I sat down beside him, leaving a careful distance between us. Come to gloat? He asked flatly. No, I said. I came to talk. Actually talk, for once. He gave a humorless laugh. What's there to talk about? You won. Congratulations. This isn't about winning or losing, James. It's about truth. And the truth is, I've spent my entire career being dismissed by you, watching you convince our family that what I do doesn't matter because it's not real tech work. So this was revenge? Getting your company to swallow mine. I sighed in frustration. Do you really believe that? Do you honestly think I would risk my professional reputation and potentially violate corporate ethics just to get back at you? James was quiet for a moment. When did you become director of acquisitions? He finally asked. 2 years ago. And you never thought to mention it at family gatherings? When would I have mentioned it, James? I asked. Between your monologues about neural networks and blockchain, you've never once asked me about my career. Not once. He had the grace to look slightly abashed. I just assumed. You assumed I was still in the same entry-level marketing position I started in 9 years ago. I finished for him. Because that fit your narrative that I wasn't capable of understanding real tech. Meanwhile, I've been steadily advancing, managing larger teams, taking on more responsibility, and actually succeeding in the industry you claim I'm not cut out for. James was silent for several long moments, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its defensive edge. Next tier was really failing, wasn't it? The vulnerability in his question caught me off guard. The technology was sound, I said carefully. But yes, the business was in trouble. I kept thinking the next round of funding would solve everything, he admitted. That we just needed a little more runway. But each milestone we set, we'd miss or barely hit, and then set a new one. That's actually pretty common in startups, I offered. It's why most fail. I didn't want to fail. For the first time, James looked directly at me, and I was startled to see the raw pain in his expression. I've built my entire identity around being the tech genius in the family. What am I if that's not true? The question hung between us, heavy with years of competition and misunderstanding. I thought carefully before responding. You are a tech genius, James. Your coding skills are incredible, and the core technology at Next Tier is genuinely innovative. That's not in question. But building a successful company requires more than just technical brilliance. It needs business acumen, market understanding, strategic planning, all the things you've dismissed as unimportant compared to coding. He winced. Things you're good at. Yes, I acknowledged. Things I'm good at. We could have been complementing each other's strengths all these years instead of you treating me like I was somehow less than you because I focused on the business side of tech. James ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar from our childhood that it momentarily transported me back to simpler times. I've been an ass, haven't I? The blunt admission startled a laugh out of me. Yes, you really have. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Can I blame it on the stereotypical arrogance of programmers? You can try, but I work with plenty of programmers who manage not to be condescending to their sisters. The smile faded, and James looked genuinely remorseful. I'm sorry, Bree. I really am. I don't think I realized how dismissive I've been until I heard it played back to me today. It was the first genuine apology I could remember receiving from my brother in years, possibly decades. Thank you for saying that. So what happens now? He asked. With Next Tier, I mean. With me. That depends partly on you, I said honestly. The integration team thinks your technology has real potential as part of our enterprise suite. You know the code better than anyone. If you can put aside your pride and work collaboratively, there's a place for you. Working for my little sister's company, he said, but without the bitterness I might have expected earlier. Working with a company that values your technical expertise, I corrected. My division oversees acquisitions, but I wouldn't be your direct manager. That would be Marcus and technical integration, and he's brilliant. You'd learn a lot from him. James was quiet for a moment. I need to think about it. That's fair, I agreed. But don't think too long. Tech moves quickly, as you know. We sat in silence for a few minutes, watching a neighbor walking their dog across the street. It wasn't a comfortable silence, exactly, but it wasn't hostile either. Progress of a sort. We should probably go back inside, I finally suggested. Mom's probably worried, and your food is getting cold. James nodded. This is going to be awkward, isn't it? Probably, I admitted. But maybe it's time we were honest with each other and with the family. No more pretending. He took a deep breath and stood up. No more pretending, he agreed, offering me his hand. I took it, allowing him to help me up, and together we walked back toward the house, toward a family dinner that would be uncomfortable but also, perhaps, the first honest one we'd had in years. Walking back into the dining room with James felt like re-entering a different world. The conversation stopped abruptly, all eyes turning toward us with varying degrees of concern and curiosity. Heather looked particularly relieved to see her husband return, some of the tension leaving her shoulders. Everything okay? Mom asked cautiously. James and I exchanged a glance. We're working on it, I answered honestly. We returned to our seats, and an awkward silence descended on the table. Uncle Rob cleared his throat. Should we, continue with dinner? Yes, please, I said gratefully. Pass the potatoes? The meal resumed with forced normalcy, conversation carefully steered toward neutral topics. But there was an unspoken acknowledgement that something fundamental had shifted in our family dynamic. James was uncharacteristically quiet, contributing to the conversation only when directly addressed. I could almost see him processing everything, recalibrating his understanding of our relationship and his place in the family narrative. As dessert was being served, Mom's traditional lemon meringue pie, James suddenly spoke up. I owe everyone an apology, he said, his voice lacking its usual confidence. Especially you, Brianna. All eyes turned to him in surprise. James Hayes didn't apologize, it simply wasn't in his repertoire. I haven't been honest about my company's situation, he continued. The truth is, Nextier was struggling badly. The acquisition by Synergy Tech wasn't my brilliant exit strategy. It was a lifeline I was lucky to get. Heather reached over to squeeze his hand supportively. And I've been less than supportive of Brianna's career, he admitted. Actually, that's an understatement. I've been dismissive and condescending, and I was completely wrong. She's achieved more in tech than I realized, and I should have been celebrating her success instead of diminishing it. The raw honesty in his voice rendered me speechless. This was a side of James the first hadn't seen since we were very young, before competition and ego had created a wall between us. Dad looked between us, clearly struggling to reconcile this new information with years of established family dynamics. James, we had no idea things were so difficult with your company. Why didn't you tell us? James shrugged, a gesture both defensive and vulnerable. Pride, I guess. I've always been the tech prodigy, the successful one. Admitting failure didn't fit that image. But sweetheart, Mom said gently, success isn't just about never failing. It's about how you handle challenges. Besides, Grandma Eleanor added with characteristic directness, it seems the real tech success story in this family has been quietly unfolding while we were all distracted by louder narratives. She smiled at me, and I felt a rush of gratitude for her unwavering support. I think, Dad said slowly, that we owe Brianna an apology too. He turned to me with genuine regret in his eyes. We should have asked more questions about your career, celebrated your achievements the way we celebrated James's. I'm sorry we didn't do that. We're very proud of you, sweetheart, Mom added, her eyes glistening. I just wish we'd known more about what you were accomplishing. The validation I'd unconsciously sought for years washed over me, both gratifying and slightly discomforting in its intensity. Thank you, I managed. That means a lot. So what happens now? Aunt Linda asked. With the company, I mean. James looked to me, tacitly acknowledging my expertise. It was such a reversal of our usual dynamic that it took me a moment to respond. Next year's technology will be integrated into Synergy Tech's main platform, I explained. The technical team has the option to join Synergy Tech, including James, who has a 1-year contract as a technical advisor. And will you? Uncle Rob asked James directly. Stay on, I mean? James glanced at me, then at Heather, before answering. I'm considering it. It would mean accepting a different role than I'm used to, but... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Maybe it's time I learned some new skills. The business side of things, specifically. It was as close to an acknowledgement of my expertise as I'd ever heard from him. I decided to meet him halfway. The tech industry works best when different types of expertise collaborate, I offered. Technical brilliance and business acumen aren't mutually exclusive, they're complementary. Like brother and sister? Grandma Eleanor suggested with a knowing smile. James actually laughed. Exactly like that, I suppose. As the meal continued, the conversation began to flow more naturally. For perhaps the first time in our adult lives, James and I engaged in a genuine dialogue rather than parallel monologues or one-sided lectures. He asked questions about my role at Synergy Tech with authentic interest, and I inquired about the technical challenges he'd solved at Nextier. Our family watched this exchange with something like wonder, as if witnessing a rare natural phenomenon. After dessert, as we helped clear the table, Dad pulled me aside. I had no idea, Brianna, he said quietly. About your job, about how successful you've become. Why didn't you tell us more? I considered the question seriously. I think after a while, I just got used to being in the background. James was always so forceful about his accomplishments that it seemed easier to stay quiet about mine. Dad looked genuinely distressed. We should have noticed. I should have noticed. It's okay, Dad, I reassured him. We all fell into patterns, but maybe now we can create some new ones. Later, as we gathered in the living room for coffee, Grandma Eleanor orchestrated a moment that would have seemed impossible just hours before. I think, she announced with the authority that only an elder matriarch can command, that we should have a proper toast to both his siblings and their achievements in technology. She raised her coffee cup, eyes twinkling, to James, whose technical brilliance created valuable innovation, and to Brianna, whose business acumen ensures that innovation reaches its potential in the market. May they both continue to succeed, perhaps even together. To James and Brianna, the family echoed, raising their cups. James caught my eye across the room and raised his cup a little higher in my direction. A simple acknowledgement, but one that spoke volumes about the shift in our relationship. As the afternoon turned to evening and guests began to depart, James approached me one more time. I meant what I said earlier, he told me quietly. I am sorry for how I've treated you and your career. I know, I said. And I appreciate that. He hesitated, then added, I'm going to take the position at Synergy Tech. I've got a lot to learn about the business side of tech, and... He smiled ruefully. It seems I have access to a pretty good teacher. I couldn't help but smile back. Just promise not to call it not real tech work, and we'll be fine. Deal, he agreed, extending his hand formally. I bypassed the handshake and gave him a quick hug instead. Happy Easter, James. Happy Easter, Bree, he replied, and for the first time in years, the nickname held affection rather than condescension. As Michael and I drove home that evening, I felt both exhausted and strangely invigorated. Years of family dynamics had been upended in a single afternoon, old patterns disrupted, new possibilities revealed. How are you feeling? Michael asked as we navigated the evening traffic. I considered the question carefully. Like something that was knotted for a very long time is finally starting to untangle, I said. It's uncomfortable, but also freeing. He smiled. Your grandmother is something else, you know that? I laughed. Oh, I know. She's been waiting for this showdown for years. Think things will actually change with James? I think they already have, I said thoughtfully. Whether those changes stick, well, that's up to both of us. As we pulled into our driveway, I realized I felt lighter than I had in years. The truth, once spoken, had cleared away long-standing cobwebs of misunderstanding and resentment. There would be awkward moments ahead, old habits reasserting themselves, new boundaries to establish. But for the first time since childhood, I felt hope for my relationship with my brother, not as competitors, but as colleagues, maybe even collaborators. Family. 3 months after that fateful Easter dinner, I found myself sitting across from James in the Synergy Tech cafeteria. It had become our weekly ritual, Tuesday lunch, to discuss the integration of next year's technology and to catch up as siblings. Today, James was animatedly explaining a new approach to the algorithm that had been next year's core innovation. The processing speed has increased by 37%, he said, his eyes bright with the excitement that had always characterized him when discussing technical challenges. Marcus thinks we can push it even further if we restructure the data pipeline. I smiled, genuinely impressed. That's fantastic, James. The enterprise clients will love that kind of performance boost. It's actually building on something your data science team suggested, he admitted, a statement that would have been unthinkable 4 months ago. Turns out there are some smart people here at the corporate sellout. We both laughed at his reference to his former dismissal of Synergy Tech. In the 3 months since James had joined the company, I'd watched him slowly adapt to corporate culture. There had been rough patches, his tendency to speak bluntly had ruffled some feathers in HR, and he'd initially bristled at the layers of approval required for changes, but he was learning. More surprisingly, he seemed to be enjoying the stability and resources a larger company provided. How are things with Marcus? I asked, referring to his direct manager. James considered the question. Good, actually. He knows his stuff, and he doesn't micromanage. I'm learning a lot about project management from him. And team leadership? Still a work in progress, he admitted ruefully. Turns out managing people requires skills I haven't fully developed yet. This self-awareness was perhaps the most striking change in my brother. The James of 6 months ago would never have acknowledged any skill deficit. You'll get there, I assured him. It takes time. Our conversation drifted to family matters. Mom and Dad had visited the Synergy Tech campus the previous week, finally seeing firsthand what both their children did professionally. It had been a revelation for them, especially Dad, who had spent the entire tour alternating between proud exclamations and confused questions about technology. I think they're still processing it all, James said. 20 years of thinking I was the only tech person in the family, and now they're trying to understand that you've been quietly outranking me for years. Not outranking, I corrected gently. Different paths, different skills. He nodded, acknowledging the distinction. Fair enough. Speaking of family, are you free for dinner at Grandma Eleanor's this weekend? She specifically requested both of us. I smiled. Since Easter, our grandmother had become even more deliberate in fostering our rebuilt relationship. Wouldn't miss it. That woman's cooking is worth any family therapy session she might have planned. She's subtle as a sledgehammer, James agreed affectionately. But effective. As we finished lunch and walked back toward our respective departments, I reflected on how much had changed. Our relationship remained a work in progress. Decades of established patterns couldn't be undone in mere months, but each interaction felt more authentic than the last. There were still moments when James slipped into his old condescending tone when discussing technical matters, but now he caught himself, often with a sheepish smile. Similarly, I was learning to assert my expertise rather than silently seething when overlooked. Our parents, too, were adapting to this new family dynamic. Mom had started asking specific questions about my work, making a genuine effort to understand what I did. Dad had begun forwarding me articles about women in tech leadership, his way of showing he recognized my place in that world. The most profound change, however, was internal. After years of diminishing my accomplishments to keep peace in the family, I was learning to take up space, to acknowledge my expertise, to correct misperceptions without apology. In professional settings, this newfound confidence translated to more effective leadership and clearer communication with my team. The following weekend, as promised, James and I joined Grandma Eleanor for dinner at her cozy apartment. After a meal of her famous pot roast, she served coffee in her living room and fixed us both with her characteristic direct gaze. So, she said, settling into her favorite armchair, "How are my two tech executives getting along these days?" James and I exchanged amused glances. "Subtlety isn't your strong suit, is it, Grandma?" I teased. "At my age, dear, there's no time for beating around the bush," she replied. "Well, we're doing well," James answered. "Better than I expected, honestly." "He's learning to accept feedback without taking it as a personal attack," I added with a smirk. "And she's learning to give feedback without sounding like a corporate training manual," James countered good-naturedly. Grandma Eleanor smiled, satisfaction evident in her expression. "Good. Families should be honest with each other, but kindly so." "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," I said. "About honesty in families. For years, we all participated in this fiction that James was the only tech success story. Me by staying quiet about my achievements, James by exaggerating his, and the rest of the family by never questioning the narrative. It was comfortable, James admitted. For me, anyway. I got to be the star. "And what have you learned from having that comfort disrupted?" Grandma asked him. James considered the question seriously. That comfort isn't always growth. That being the star kept me from learning things I needed to know. And that. He glanced at me, that I missed out on a potential ally by treating my sister like a competitor. Grandma nodded approvingly before turning to me. "And you, Brianna? What have you learned?" "That silence isn't actually peace," I said. That diminishing myself to make others comfortable wasn't serving anyone, least of all me. And that authenticity, while sometimes uncomfortable, is the only way to be truly known and loved. "Very good," Grandma said, sounding like the professor she once was. "Now, the real test will be taking these lessons forward." Family patterns have a way of reasserting themselves if we're not vigilant. We're working on it, I assured her. James has actually been asking for my input on managing his team at Synergy Tech. And Brianna's been consulting me on technical aspects of upcoming acquisitions, James added. Turns out our skills really do complement each other. As I've been saying for approximately 30 years, Grandma noted dryly. We laughed, the sound of genuine affection filling the small apartment. As the evening wound down and we prepared to leave, Grandma Eleanor held both our hands in hers. I'm proud of you both, she said simply. Not just for your professional accomplishments, impressive as they are, but for doing the hard work of breaking unhealthy patterns. That takes more courage than any career achievement. On the drive home, I found myself reflecting on her words. It had indeed taken courage to disrupt the comfortable fiction our family had maintained for years. But the freedom that came with authenticity was worth the temporary discomfort. James and I would never have a perfect relationship. Siblings rarely do. We were too different in our approaches, too shaped by our individual experiences. But we had found a way to respect those differences rather than allowing them to divide us. To see them as complementary rather than competitive. In the tech industry, where change is the only constant, adaptability is essential for success. James and I had finally applied that principle to our personal relationship, and both were stronger for it. The truth, as it turned out, hadn't destroyed our family as I'd feared. It had rebuilt it on a more solid foundation, one where achievements weren't compared but celebrated, where differences weren't threats but assets, and where being known was more important than being impressive. It was a lesson I carried forward into all aspects of my life, that authentic connections, built on honesty rather than performance, were the most valuable technology of all. Have you ever experienced a moment where standing in your truth changed a relationship for the better? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if you've enjoyed this journey of sibling rivalry turned collaboration, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about navigating complex family dynamics. Share this video with someone who might need permission to shine their own light without dimming it for others. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the most important disruption isn't in technology, but in the patterns we've accepted for too long.